Just an introduction. So my name's Professor Oscar Says. I'm the current head of the Department of Chemistry here. I'll be chairing this kind of first panel session. I just want to say it's a very big warm welcome. When we set this up, we were really hoping it would attract this level of attention. It's fantastic to see such a broad cross-section of people from the White City ecosystem, but beyond that, from academia, from industry, SMEs, local government, local community. It really is kind of fantastic. And we've got a great set of panel discussions ahead today. In this first one, we've got an illustrious set of leaders from industry, from the trade organisations, from local kind of government. And what we're looking to in this first session is kind of look at how we can hardwire collaboration into White City, what's special about it, and what we think the kind of future holds. Now, before going ahead, I want to introduce our speakers. So we have Chris Williams, who is SVP of Corporate Development at Autolus. Well, welcome, Chris. Fiona McLaughlin, who's the Chief Scientific Officer from Avacta. Welcome. Steve Bates, OBE, who is the CEO of the BioIndustry Association. Welcome, Steve. And finally, Stephen Cowan, who's the lead of Hammersmith and Fulham Council. Now, as I said, we want this to be a really interactive session. What we've got at the beginning is 2 questions, which we'll throw to the panel. I'll say a few words as well. But then beyond that, it's about what you'd like to hear. So there are 2 roving mics travelling around with 2 volunteers. So when you have a question at the end, please raise your hand. The volunteer will come over the microphone and kind of take your question. But as I said, it's about coming away from today, and I think the practical take-home message is when you see what's happening, if you're not already involved in White City, to see how your organisation can plug into what's happening here, add value, and generate kind of broader impact for the area and kind of beyond. Okay, so the first question for the day we're asking the panellists is, what is special about the White City Innovation District? Within that, how their organisation has collaborated here, and how they're kind of seeking to kind of collaborate in the future. Now, before handing it over, I might just say a few words from the point of view here of the department, the kind of college. And for those of you heard a second ago how the area has changed. It really has. If you came here 5 years, 10 years ago, it is utterly unrecognisable. And that investment in infrastructure and equipment, it is breathtaking, but for me, that is not the magic source of what makes this kind of place special. The thing that for me has become very special is the people who live within these buildings, the stakeholder community, and how it's come together to be an extremely collaborative ecosystem. Now, to understand what I mean by that, when we came here, I think 2018 roughly is when we put down our footprint as a department, we had a real vision with the college about an ecosystem that would co-locate academia, industry, enterprise and beyond. Now, that's a great catchphrase, but lots of science parks say that. And then when you're on the ground, the reality is quite different. There are silos between different parts of the organisations. And we really were determined to kind of break down those barriers and redefine how industry and academia could work together. And when you spend time on a daily basis, what is really special is nearly every stakeholder on campus knows what everyone else's future roadmap is, what their needs are in terms of talent, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of equipment. There is a shared ownership of what the vision for the White City Innovation Ecosystem is moving forwards. There's a real kind of sense of a neighbourhood. And that, frankly, it changed our DNA as a university. And what I mean by that is if you look at what big universities tend to do, the focal point initially is around probably working with a big kind of industry kind of giants. And that's a really beneficial partnership in the 2 directions. Fantastic. Then the next level of priority tends to be SMEs whose genesis is the university, a staff startup, a student startup. And then a distant third has in the past tended to be SMEs which don't have a link to the university. And the reason for that is just often, it's normally bandwidth. There are only so many things you can do in a given day. And traditional ways of working are not often aligned with the speed at which SMEs operate. So when we came here a few years ago, 2 years before we landed, so to speak, we asked, what do you need from us? And the question was, operate nimbly, lead innovation frameworks, give us access to your capital infrastructure. You have equipment we don't have, access to talent. And we really looked very closely at that. And I think the first 3 years of our journey was changing that. In this building, at any one time, 30% of the equipment is being used by people who are not in the building. Local SMEs, corporate partners, the medical kind of campus. We can set up contracts now in days that would previously have taken weeks, months, or kind of years. So those barriers that prevented collaboration, we've tried to knock them down. And I think I always joke and say when we came here initially, it was a bit like the Wild West. I'm not sure college always knew what we were doing, which was a good thing. So we'd often try things out and then say, do you know what? The traditional way of working, we can do it differently. And college bought into that. And now, as other units have come on board, the year end, the School of Public Health, that spirit's percolated through. But it's a two-way thing. When I reach out to someone, people at White City Place, like David Height or Richard Boyd at Scale Space, and I need a favour, or I said, look, there's a collaboration we can set up. That spirit of helping out is just as much in my direction as us pushing out as a university. And that is, as an example, today, this is a very busy event. We suddenly needed a room, an extra room with 200 people. When I contacted Scale Space, it was within an hour it was set up. That does not normally kind of happen, that level of kind of collaboration. That is really kind of special and kind of enabling thing. So when you add to that the fact we have got amazing R&D, amazing expertise and talent, I think there are a set of USPs we have here which kind of we don't find in concert elsewhere in the world. So as Mary said, we're kind of really kind of proud to anchor that. Now with that, I'll hand over to our first speaker. And Steve, it would be great to hear your thoughts on what you think makes the district so special.
Yeah, I think, if I start off with a quote, so there's a book called No Ordinary Disruption, The Four Global Forces Breaking All the Trends. One of the quotes from this book by Richard Dobbs, James Manica, and Jonathan Wutzel is, compared with the Industrial Revolution, this change, happening 10 times faster, 300 times the scale, or 3,000 times the impact. And that's talking about everything that's going on in STEM at the moment. Now, if you look in 2021, South Korea led the world in the Bloomberg Innovation Index. Germany is 4th. The EU has 6th for top 10 countries in the index, and Britain is 18th. And yet, we have some of the best innovation via our academic institutions anywhere in the world. And if that innovation is captured in anything, it is in life sciences, but particularly strengths across the whole of STEM. So when we came into office in 2014, we had developed, and we were lucky enough to have a professor of economic geography as our cabinet member in the local borough for the economy, who's now the Vice Chancellor of Brunel. But we had a very firm view that the laissez-faire sort of consensus that had existed wasn't quite in keeping with what was going on with the most innovative economies around the world. If you look at South Korea, who set out to develop 10 innovation cities, it was a combination of state intervention with private sector business and with academic institutions. And we pitched that to Alice Gast when we met her, that we wanted to build the new Bay Area, we wanted to build the new Kendall Square, we wanted to turn White City into a global economic hotspot in science, tech, engineering, maths, medicine, and media. And to our surprise, she pitched us back almost the same vision. So there was very much a meeting of cultural values and what we thought White City could be. And that's what we set about building. Now, since then, we've delivered thousands and thousands of square meters of genuinely affordable, flexible office space for start-up and scale-up entrepreneurs. We have attracted whole bunches of anchor institutions, many sitting on this panel, but recently NATO as well. And we have had 60 life science startups or scale-ups move to White City. And the idea is that if we create a center of gravity where excellence happens, which is, by the way, how every economic hotspot around the world throughout since the Industrial Revolution ever grew, if we can nudge that and facilitate that, and we took a lot of the model of the German lender, where local government there has a responsibility of getting the garden right so flowers will grow, we figured that we could become the new Silicon Valley in the 21st century. And it is really to a tribute of Imperial to all the entrepreneurs, to everyone in this room, that now we have the greatest amount of business investment in West London compared to all of West London put together. Now that is a stark figure. Look at the size of Hammersmith and Fulham, and look at the other size of the other boroughs. They are huge. To have more than them put together is a signal of what happens when you set off with intent and with government facilitation. So what we do with our industrial strategy partnership with Imperial College is we've changed the planning rules to facilitate affordable, flexible office space. We brought in Blenheim Chalcott, who are able to invest and support businesses. We've just twinned with Barcelona and their 22 at Barcelona Innovation District, and are looking to form a global innovation network so that we can share the best ideas with other liberal democracies and make sure that we are where the economic growth happens. I agree that we need to be optimistic. It is alarming that many in the life sciences are putting up the danger flag at the moment, and we should listen to the experts at the front line. But I think what we need to have in our hearts and what we need to have in our imaginations is the view that what's happened here, the economic ecosystem we've built here, is a model for a great British Renaissance. Outside of not just the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London, but we can spread it around Britain with the same type of intervention. And if we are going to try and shape the 21st century and live up to our message that tomorrow is made here, then what we have to do is work much more muscularly, as we see in Barcelona, to make sure that Britain dominates these sectors, because every single business is given the right type of support to make them thrive and therefore to lock in our economic strength throughout the rest of the coming decades.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve. Really interesting. What I would say before I pass over to Chris, that I didn't know about the Barcelona collaboration. If you're looking for a lead or someone to live there,
yeah.
I'm your man. So, yeah. I'm actually Spanish. So at that point, Chris, I'd love to hand over to you. You know, you've been located for quite a while. You've probably seen more change than any other person in the room in the area. What are your thoughts about the district?
Thanks, Oscar. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, as Oscar says, we were one of the first sort of biotech companies to move here. We founded Autolus in 2014 out of University College London, and at that time we were looking at two main criteria. We need to be close to our founders and access that innovation and expertise that we need to thrive and grow off from. And we also need space to grow. We sort of scanned literally the darkest depths of London to find somewhere. There's nowhere in central London. UCL doesn't have anywhere on campus. All the small incubator hubs were full. We looked at Stevenage. We didn't want to move out of London because we didn't want to lose that core innovation that we had within the company that was going to be the engine of the early days of the company. And we chanced upon Imperial building out the scheme. It was at that time the old Unigate Dairy site was still there. The Marks and Spencer's warehouse was still there. It was a project, a polystyrene project on a desk in the Imperial offices, and they said, we've got Forest House, which was a small building that was demolished at the end of last year, just across the road there. And we went for it. We were able to secure a lease on one floor with the option to expand onto the second floor of the building, and it provided us exactly what we needed. We're in central London. All of our already existing talent could commute here. It was easy as their previous commute to University College London. And there was space to grow. So you'll fast forward 7 years, will be 8 years in September. We're now a company that's around 400 employees. We are main offices are now in MediaWorks, White City Place. So Imperial's not our landlord anymore, but the old BBC buildings are an extension of the Imperial kind of biotech hub. And we're based in Stevenage and in Maryland in the US. We have a late phase drug for the treatment of acute lymphoblastic leukemia that we hope to file for registration at the end of this year. So we have been able to grow in this space, from a small building on the Imperial campus now to occupying a top floor of one of the big buildings across the road. And a stepping stone was a space in the iHub, as we expanded, but the space wasn't ready across the main road. And Imperial have been hugely supportive along the way. We collaborate with Imperial. We use Imperial's services to do our in vivo work as a capability that biotech wants to build in-house. We want to access CROs to do that, or much more ideally, an academic institution, our doorstep to collaborate with. So, it's been fantastic to see it grow to where it is now.
Thanks, Steve. Chris, I think you make a really interesting point there about lab space as well, because I think one of the things we've seen here grow organically is that if you're an SME that has 1 or 2 employees, the area can absorb you. And if you keep growing to this length scale of 300 or 400 employees, you've not got to leave the area. Yeah. And if you grow too fast, the system will catch you on the way down. I think there's not many places that cater both in terms of price and size in one place.
The last thing you want to do is have to relocate into a different area of the UK to grow your company, because you're just going to lose the momentum and retention of staff. So it's provided it for us over this 7-year period.
Absolutely. So Fiona, you folks moved into the district just last year. Was one of the newest members of the community. What's your perspective?
Yeah, so we've got quite a different story. So Avacta's been around for a number of years. So 2015 is a therapeutics business, but many years before that as a diagnostics business up in Wetherby in the north of England. When I joined the company, the therapeutics headquarters was in Cambridge, but it wasn't quite in Cambridge. It was in around the corner from Granta Park, but it wasn't on the park. I've spent a lot of my life in Cambridge, and it's not an easy city to get around. So being a mile away from Granta Park is an issue. I love Cambridge. I did my PhD there, but I could see that site wasn't going to be future-proofed for us. We looked around Cambridge, and as anyone knows, Cambridge is absolutely full because AstraZeneca didn't pull out from all the buildings that they were in before they built the new building. So we came to London to look, and we looked around King's Cross because we thought that was a good compromise for the guys based in Cambridge, but there was really nothing the right size for us. There was, as you say, small buildings for a couple of people. We were 40-odd people. So they're either too small or too large, or you were down at what's still the wrong end of King's Cross, where you don't really want to be walking home on a dark evening. So we came down to Scale Space with my colleague Neil Bell, who used to work with Autolus, who knew the area. We met Michael, and it was the end of a long day. We'd been dragged around loads of places at King's Cross, and I really didn't want to go home rather than come down to White City. And we went up to this top floor in Scale Space. I don't know if anyone's been in the building, but there are fantastic vistas right across London. It's a really light and bright space. So, many of us who spent our years in labs, we end up in the basement with no windows because we're the research guys. But it wasn't just about the lightness and brightness. It was you could see the opportunity that was there. So at first we thought we'll just take, because it was pre-designed as incubator space. So we saw the space, we thought actually we'll just take it all. So we just took the majority of that floor, and our neighbours, I think, are here, are also Pure Affinity. And that was the point. One of the points I was going to mention is that in Scale Space, it's not just biotech, it's media and high tech and communications. And so one of the things that I absolutely love about it is that you meet people that you wouldn't meet if you were on Granta Park, where it's primarily therapeutics businesses. You meet people that still might have benefit interacting with, but you wouldn't have met them in any other forum. And then the other thing, people like Kat, who was managing all the marketing around Scale Space, you will know because I have people come up all the time. It's a fantastic place to be, to meet people. So there are events after work, I think almost every night of the week if you wanted to. We use it for our board meetings. We're hosting a science day in a few weeks' time. It's a great place. You come to our labs and you feel it's a destination. So many people come and have tours. People from Oxford came and had tours around the building, and they were really wanting to build something like that in Oxford, but probably can't because of the college system and, colleges owning the land and not wanting that kind of space. So for me, there's a huge benefit being in London. So we did what other people didn't think of, is we moved from Cambridge to London. We brought a lot of staff with us, but what we're also doing is really building up the team. So recruiting from here is actually relatively easy so long as you move very quickly, because it's a highly competitive environment. I think it's a fantastic time to be a young researcher looking for a job. There are loads of opportunities around, but we are finding you can't wait too long, or they've gone to your neighbour or gone to AstraZeneca. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think what I see is that the life sciences is absolutely thriving in the UK, and I think the Golden Triangle is still a big part of where we are. I think we do have to build that critical mass like you have in Kendall Square, you have in San Francisco. I think that's really important because people need to know they can move from one company to another without moving house each time. Yep. So I think that's actually really important. And having access to 2 tube lines, for example, is really beneficial, particularly in these times. Yeah. So it's quite easy to get here from most parts of London, especially from the west. So I think there's a huge number of benefits for us from being here.
Cool. That's really, some fantastic points. I mean, 2 that I'd say resonate with me in particular. One is about the fact that although it has a very strong life sciences presence, it's that mixture of other kind of companies. I mean, the first company, I'm not sure there's anyone in the audience from there, was first company I met when I came was Cluster Market. And I was when we sort of were committed here to giving companies outside of the department access to our kit, we were like, that sounds great, but how do you actually facilitate that logistically? And if, cluster market, like kind of the Airbnb of scientific equipment, they basically formed a collaboration with us, deployed the software in the building, and kind of overnight we solved a problem that might have taken us years in to kind of fix, and that probably wouldn't happen at South Kent. The other one is the point you make about talent. One of the things we've seen as a university is that we now have graduates who are coming to want to study in the department because they know their final year will be here amongst an ecosystem where they can find employment really quickly. And that, at the undergraduate level, since we came out, undergraduate numbers have literally doubled. I think that's been one of the biggest kind of drivers. So Steve, at the end, very well welcome. We'd love to hear your point of view as an outsider, what life science companies are looking for in the UK and how does the district meet or not meet that?
So thanks very much. And Oscar, am I right in thinking there's 200 people in scale space watching this as well?
Yeah, there's an overflow.
So I get to do these sorts of things all around the world. And the reason I know we are now competing with China is we've got a room with 200 people in it somewhere else, because that's what you find in China. The scale is just that big. But it's the first time I've come to a UK event with the 200 people in a spillover room. So we're on the global stage and we're doing the right thing. So the BIA, the UK BioIndustry Association, I think is not an outsider. I hope we're part of the crowd because we support the sector across the UK, and some of the stuff that we advocate for and hopefully have got is of real use to the people here, whether that be the opportunity to get the support of Innovate grants, whether it's the R&D tax credits, whether it's the chance to network and engage, and hopefully some of the banging the drum we do for the sector on the national stage with the government to keep it high profile. So, so why is this a great place? Well, I think what you've got here is you've got, it's small enough to be networked, but packs a punch big enough to be noticed on the global stage. And before I came, I actually read a paper from Imperial, a rare treat for me. It was the one about Avatar and using, who saw the one, is that your paper? Fantastic. Oh, brilliant, even better. I saw the news piece and I actually went in and I read the paper. This is about using, tell me if I get this wrong, but it was about using AI to in a clinical trial environment to update for the 6-minute walk test for kids with rare diseases, often with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Used to work for Genzyme, so I know a lot about that as a rare disease company. So it's and what was really intriguing about that was how you bring together the creativity of AI plus new developments in clinical trials. So it's this intersection, it makes the difference. And what I thought was really interesting is what we need to do is get that into a regulated environment so that it makes a real difference. Now, where do you do that? Now, because the UK is a small scene, I ping that to June Rain, who runs the MHRA, and say, June, I phoned you up about mRNA the other year and you didn't know what it was. And then it sort of became quite important. We need to do the same for this sort of stuff. And we can get it going fast here because we have got those things that are happening. We've got deep science, but we've also got the translation capability. We've got the regulatory capability, and then the global players that are in the audience that can take that on. I think that that's what gets it going, and I'm really excited to be here.
Fantastic. I mean, in terms of, we've heard kind of the potential, in terms of making sure we are competitive on the global stage, the UK, what do you think is missing or we need to keep maintaining? That was one for Steve.
Yeah, well, I think that who here in the audience, and I can't see your hands in scale space, I'm afraid. If there's tech way of putting your hands up and showing me, it'd be brilliant. Who here has got millions of pounds to invest in life sciences? Put your hands up if you've got millions of pounds to invest in life sciences. Someone little, come on, Avi, you can put your hand up. Avi works for Novartis, I'll go and see him. But there's a couple of other people who might have. There's not enough people putting their hands up that they've got millions of pounds to invest in life sciences in the room. That's number one. Capital at a rate and a pace to be able to deploy against this. Now, we've got to be nice to the people in the city, we've got to be nice to people around the world. There are people who can do this. That's one of the things we've not got. Who here is in a relationship with somebody else in the room or in scale space? I don't have to admit that one. One of the other things that makes an ecosystem is relationships on all different levels. They can be professional relationships, they can be personal relationships, they can be historic relationships. Me and Steve discovered we got friends in common from 20 years ago. Part of what makes an ecosystem sticky is deep relationships. They can be on a whole host of scales. I encourage you to deepen those relationships of any nature whatsoever, as long as they're collaborative and friendly. Even competitive relationships can be quite good sometimes because you get it going through today and into the evening. That is what makes an ecosystem buzz, and I think there's lots of people here who definitely look like they're worth being in relationships with. I'm happily married, so.
But any of the panelists like to kind of follow on for that question about what else is kind of needed to kind of take things to the next level? Any of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just back what Steve was saying. It was quite interesting having a look at Area 22 in Barcelona. There was two things that were different to the UK. The first was the local authority has a much more muscular approach to land development. So, for example, 20 years ago, they had no universities in their innovation district. Now they've got 10. And part was they were able to make the land only for universities and then gift the land at pretty much a very low price to the universities. And that, therefore, brought the cluster in that now puts them as a global player. So that's the first thing, is land development. The second thing is who invests in the businesses, as Steve touched upon. Because in Barcelona, it's the city, often, it's the regional government who are taking a slice in return for very cheap or very low office space and other sorts of facilities. What we've done in Hammersmith and Fulham is set up upstream because we wanted to make sure that businesses didn't go bust for daft reasons, which often they do, that we were giving all that regular support. We changed our planning rule to give people affordable, flexible office space. And we're even changing our housing policies to try and prioritise who we house locally and build things for Novartis or Autolus so people live here, because we do think those coffee shop or bar or restaurant moments where people just meet, connect, and maybe start a business or maybe just collaborate in some other way is what makes an ecosystem work. But I think the two things is you'd want to have a much more thoughtful approach to investment and what the role of the state in facilitating that and making sure that long-term economic growth can be picked. And I don't think, as a country, we've really rounded on that. And they are elsewhere. They are in South Korea. They are in Spain. They are in Germany. And indeed, they are in many of our global competitors.
Cool. So thanks. With that, we're going to come to the next question we discussed before. So that is, how can the life sciences contribute and benefit from being based at White City for the good of the local area, London, UK more broadly, and within that, consider things like economic growth and social mobility. So in this case, I think I'll start in kind of reverse order. So Steve, I'd like to start with you. What are your thoughts on that? Or what lessons can we draw from other places?
Well, the most important thing is that we make some stuff that makes a difference to society, and that can be in a broad range of things. So we've got to turn it from an idea into a real thing. I had the privilege of working on the UK vaccine task force, and it was an absolute privilege to be able to be a small part in a big team that developed something that fast to actually make a difference in a global pandemic. That's the ultimate goal that you can do with products from life sciences, and we shouldn't forget that. And getting things out and away so that they actually become impactful is the goal. And I think keeping your eyes on the prize is the most important thing, because all the other benefits, which are whether that be the building of the business, the running of the team, the academic papers, the next piece of science, comes as a result of going for those goals. And those goals have to be in the real world, because that is where we are going to make the biggest change.
Fantastic. I mean, Fiona, what would you like to add? Great to hear the viewpoint of an SME.
Yeah, I mean, for us as an oncology biotech, everything we do has to be tangible. So we're not here to do blue skies research. That's why we collaborate with academics. We're here to do the blue skies research, and then our job is to turn that into a drug. And that was one of the main points that I had when I joined Avacta. With everything we're doing is, where's the drug? If there's no drug, we shouldn't work on it because we don't have time. We don't have time to wait. From a commercial point of view, in terms of our patent life, from a patient point of view, in terms of getting drugs to patients. So everything we do has to be very high pace, and we have to make decisions all the time about the projects that we work on and what we prioritise. So I think getting drugs to patients is our main focus, and we have, as you know, a drug in phase 1 where we're running it in the UK. It's 6 sites. One of them is the Marsden. And going back to the first point about interaction, it's really easy to meet people face to face when you're here, because there are either partners flying into Heathrow, which is great to get to, or people who are based in South London coming across to see us, and we find people's ability to want to pop in to meet you rather than spend a whole day getting somewhere further afield is much better. So one of the things is the delivery to patients, and then the second thing is actually the local community. So we're really keen to train young people in sciences, recognising that not everyone needs to do a degree and not everyone needs to do a PhD, depending on what you want to do. So one of the things we're doing is talking to Harrow College about their apprenticeship schemes. So getting hold of good lab techs, as I'm sure many people know, is really difficult, Because people either want to go straight into the lab and go to university or do, work in the city and earn lots of money. They don't want to do those kind of slightly, laborious tasks. So we're doing that through an apprenticeship scheme. We also have 2 industrial placement students, one of whom's actually from Imperial. And that's, I did that when I was a student. I went to ICI a long time ago. And it's a really important thing, because for me, that was actually what made me think this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I think giving people a taste of what industry feels like is really important, because then you either decide this is what I want to do, or you think, no, this is I want to do blue skies research, and I know this isn't the place for me. So we're doing that every year now. We've got 2 students lined up for next year. And they're absolutely excellent. If you pick students from a good university, they hit the ground running, they don't take up lots of your time to train them, and I think that's something we can give back, is actually giving local people an opportunity to come and spend a year. We do work placements as well, not too many, and I think that's really important that we give something back.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Just to add to that, one of the things we're seeing here, that there's maybe the audience is, one of our biggest growth areas is actually students starting companies. The number of students who say now to me, I don't want to join Google, I want to start Google. Yeah. And that's also, and where we see the changes from digitech into the life sciences, the fact that students can access lab space easily, they are part of the driving force in the college now. So there's a consideration about how we kind of support them. But it is, people come to Imperial now to do that. Steve, do you want to go next after me?
Well, yeah, sure. I love what Fiona said. We are in a sort of a Goldilocks zone in Hammersmith and Fulham of economic growth, because you've got Heathrow here, the city in the West End there, and we're just about to put one of Europe's biggest train stations into about half a mile away from here, and give us super fast links up to Manchester and Birmingham, assuming high speed 2 gets delivered quickly. But it's definitely important that the transport links do that, because it allows the economic growth to spread. So we are in a perfect place. Now we have Imperial as a golden ideas goose, laying all these different STEM industry eggs. I think the question then is, how do you make it inclusive as an economic ecosystem? Because we've all talked about the importance of having wealth generation, but for me, as a Labour politician, I want to see it as an inclusive ecosystem. And I think our pitch to business is we would like to have a 20-year talent strategy, and that does mean, how do we get our children being born today to be ripe to go to Imperial and to indeed be the next person that sets up a new version of Google in tomorrow? And 20 years, I can tell you, now I'm in my 50s, isn't very long at all. So I think, if you look at the lesson in Germany, the German city-states and Länder have an awful lot of ability to influence the curriculum of schools and to make sure it's aligned with their industry. If you're in Stuttgart, there's a very good chance you're going to get a job in some facet of the car industry. So we should be doing that now in science, technology, engineering, maths, medicine, and media. And that's what we're trying to do, but because of the nature of the school ecosystem, the school economic approach, the school economy, is we don't have direct influence. We've got to use our soft power to encourage extracurricular activity in these areas. And that's something that our Industrial Strategy Board spends a lot of time talking about. We've had apprenticeships come in and saying, what can we do to get apprenticeships in these places and make them seamless and align them and make them even more effective. But I think we've still got some way to go on that. We've still got some way to go. But if there's something that locks us in permanently, it is actually how we align the education system so we have a long-term plan. And I know business is up for it, because we've gone and seen businesses, and I've made a point of not saying to business, how are you going to help us take some people on? I've just gone and said, what do you want? What can we do to help? And invariably they say talent management. So I think it's coming at it from 2 separate ends. But if Britain is to really seize the moment, education, 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 someone else once said, I think that's more relevant now in this sector than ever before.
Yeah, I fully agree. I can see 5-10 years from now, entrepreneurship being embedded in education in the same way that any other kind of part of education is. Yeah. Chris, Autolus, you've seen massive rapid growth last few years. Where do you see life sciences contributing locally and globally?
To echo my panelists' comments around talent, it's great scientists that drive development, not great science. We have great science in the UK, but we need access to highly skilled individuals who have experience of taking a laboratory idea that comes from the university all the way through to a drug. Very few people have done that. And we need more of those people in the UK. A lot of them have left and gone to the US, which is where all the investment is, as Steve was alluding to earlier. If we can nurture and build talent locally, I think we've got a unique talent base in London. Students interested in biotech and entrepreneurship, looking to get into our industry. People looking to come to universities like Imperial and UCL and King's to exactly get into these industries because they're on our doorstep. How can we build that talent pool into people that know how to develop drugs and drive new therapies all the way to market? As a growing biotech over the last 7 years, access to talent has been the single biggest barrier. We're 400 people, as I said before. Around 100 of those are located in the US, and they're hardcore drug development people. That's where those people live generally, not so much in the UK. And anything we can do to sort of retain that talent over here for the long term, we should pursue.
Yeah, fantastic. So folks, unfortunately with that, we've kind of run out of time. That was our last question, but I just wanted to say thank you very much for the questions. But above all, I want to say a massive, massive thank you to all our speakers. Steve, the two Steves, Fiona and Chris, and thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank you, folks.